Alright, we're going to take a look at user interface controls. First off, a simple reminder. We want to make sure that your emulator does have keyboard support. Just a reminder as to how we do that. Edit your Android virtual device and add keyboard support. As we build a user interface, there are certain issues that we want to remember. First off, users are mobile. Have you ever tried to use an application that requires lots of user input from a mobile device? It's not necessarily the best user experience, and we need to remember that. Let's remember that fingers are not necessarily the best pointing devices. Stylus are typically better for control, but they can be clumsy and easy to lose. Remember, we're dealing with devices that have typically small screens. Your desktop and laptop have a much larger screen with mice and are easier to typically control. Let's remember that mobile devices have much lower power capabilities. Don't do things that will require tremendous amounts of data input, which keeps the screen lit, as well as possibly hit remote resources heavily without a good reason to do so. Also, let's think about your users for a minute. Users, when they are mobile and on the go, typically don't have a lot of patience, so don't expect a lot of tolerance to requiring a user to input too much data. Finally, remember, as we're testing out an application, we're probably using the Android emulator. The Android emulator is connected to our desktop, and we have a keyboard and mice that we can use there. That's not necessarily the same as a user who's walking through the mall or trying to connect up with some friends over Twitter or Facebook. Let's take a look at a couple of new terms. First off, a view. A view occupies a rectangular region on the screen and is responsible for drawing and event handling. Typically, we're going to think of this as a user control. A view group is an invisible container that can hold other controls. And then finally, we have a layout. A layout will define how views are laid out on the screen. Android has many different types of layouts. Let's look at several. First off, there's the absolute layout. An absolute layout is a layout that lets you specify exact locations of its children. Absolute layouts are less flexible and harder to maintain than other types of layouts without this absolute positioning. Absolute layouts are older and typically should not be used anymore in Android. A frame layout is designed to block out an area on the screen to display a single item. You can add multiple children to a frame layout, but all children are pegged to the top left of the screen. Children are drawn in a stack with the most recently added child on top. The size of the frame layout is the size of the largest child plus some padding. A linear layout is a layout that arranges the views in a single column or single row. The direction of the row can be set by calling the orientation of the layout. Most of the examples that you will see will use the linear layout for simplicity. A relative layout is one where the positions of the controls can be displayed in relation to each other or the parent. A table layout consists of a number of table rows and can be thought of as similar in concept to an HTML table. View groups are simply a group of controls. Several items which are view groups are layouts and grids. Layouts we will look at in this section. Grids and list views we will look at in another section. Views are controls. They're controls that you will work with on an everyday basis as an Android developer. Some of the more common ones are the edit text, which we will use to edit data, the text view, which is a label type of control, a spinner, which is effectively a drop-down list box for those of us in the .NET world, a button, which we can use to begin processing information, and many other types of UI widgets. A button is a standard UI control. With it, we can have a click event. We can also set its text property so that we can change the text, the meaning that the button gives the user. And these are a couple of the items that we'll look at when we look at buttons in our source code. In the Android world, there's the text view. That is effectively just a label control for those of us coming from the .NET world. We can use the text view to output and view data. It's a read-only control. We can set the values on it programmatically. In the Android world, we have the edit text. For us coming from the .NET world, it's just the text box. This is nothing more than a standard input control that we can use to enter some text. Now, let's switch over to some code and take a look at how this works. Alright, so let's look at an application running in the Android emulator. In this case, what we've got a series of buttons that are going to open other activities. So, let's just take this first one at the top. We'll open up another activity, and as you can see, we've got a text box and we've got a label inside of it. So let's go ahead, we'll input some text into it. We will get rid of the additional text that is inside of it. And then when we click a button, we'll see that our label, or in this case our text view, is updated. Now, let's go and we'll switch over, we'll look at this code and we'll see what happened. So, here we have our activity, and this is a text view activity, that's just the name for it. And we have our text view, it is inheriting from an activity. Inside of our onCreate method, we are loading our user interface. We are going to create a reference to a button that is loaded from the text view activity, which is in our resources. And then finally, we're going to set up an event handler. Previously, we had looked at setting up an event handler based just on a delegate. This is the other way to do it in Android. Both should be fairly similar to .NET developers. Finally, when we click on our button, we are going to create a reference to our text view, and then we are also going to go and create a reference to our edit text, and then we will fill the label, which in this case is the text view, with whatever content was entered within our edit text. So with those several simple lines of code, we have easily mastered a button, a edit text, and a text view. Now, let's go look at the layout for these controls. To do that, we are going to go into our layout, and we will look at our text view, and here we are. As you can see, we have our edit text. Notice that when we initially load, we had specified the word edit text. We've got several other parameters. In this case, we've got a ID set up. We have set up the width of the control. In this case, we're going to use whatever the width is of our linear layout. In this case, it will be the screen size. We will set the height of the control as necessary based on the content. And then we will do similar things for our text view and for our button. And notice that these are all inside of a linear layout.